As a customer in the 90s, there was a Major D. He would know your name. He would say, "Hey Pierre, welcome to the show. I'll escort you to your room or to your seat in a show." And nowadays, you're just a rewards number, and you're in a computer database. And it's a different world where major corporations are leading the way. And it's not all bad. I mean, obviously, the major corporations are also doing a good job in paving the way for the next era of Vegas.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Bingo, bango, bango. Joris Dekkers, great to have you here on the Next Table podcast today. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Looking forward to the Christmas holidays, and I feel great. It's been a nice year.
Absolutely, my friend, and I can see the nice backdrop you have there. You're getting ready for the holidays for sure. And an extra reason to celebrate Christmas on your side this year, of course, is the fact that you have finished the Las Vegas book project that is basically mapping out the entire history of Las Vegas, which is what we're going to talk about today. It's a really exciting project that you have undertaken. And just as a first question here, Joris, why did you decide to undertake this massive project, and what has gone into producing this book?
I have been a iGaming affiliate and a iGaming employee at several large companies such as Kindred and Better Collective. And during that journey, like moving in between affiliation and working for the more corporations, I found that there was not much for me to explore anymore, at least not, let's say, something entirely new in the iGaming industry that I found interesting. And I also felt that, having made some good money over the years, I wanted to do something again with my passion. I remember that I think it was during the COVID, one of the COVID months, that shops were, kind of opening up again. And I remember that me and my girlfriend, we visited a bookshop, and this was for me, like, I got goosebumps right away. Like I hadn't been in bookshops for a long time anymore since, ever since I worked for the gaming industry. I think I kind of withdrew myself a little bit from my hobby, which is reading and, delving into historical books and whatnot. So I thought, okay, maybe I should do something with that again. And that kind of started to materialize more into a concrete idea about doing something with Vegas. Las Vegas for me has always been a joyful experience, but also one that has sort of captivated my interest in a more deeper level, as in how did this glorious city once, start, and where did it come from, and who are all these interesting founders that must have been, big visionaries building these gigantic casinos on the Strip. So, and then I think I took a trip to a nice island off the coast of the US, like in the Caribbean. And I had a few Vegas books with me, and I was reading them on the plane, and I was interested particularly in a few cool guys, such as Jay Sarno, who built Caesar's Palace, and Steve Wynn, who obviously built the Bellagio and Wynn Las Vegas. And once I was, reading, I was like, okay, I have to do a book about Vegas. I got really into those books, and I thought, let's do it.
It's an incredibly interesting city, of course. And I remember coming to Vegas for the first time as a 21-year-old. It was the first thing I did when I turned 21 is to visit the city of my dreams from being in the gambling industry for my entire career. And this was in 2008 when the financial crisis had just hit, and the city once again was facing many big challenges, and just eye-opening to visit the city for the first time. And like you, I had the same thoughts as well. Where does all of this come from? So going into that question itself, what is the origin story of Vegas? This very remote place in the middle of the desert that gave birth to the entertainment complex of the world. Can you go back to the very beginning and talk about how this all started?
Sure. So it's good to tell that my book really focuses on the Strip, not so much on downtown, but that is actually where Vegas really started. So the history of Vegas really started in Fremont Street, which was the first street where there was like a paved way. You had like local shops, and also the first bars with games of chance being offered. So this was kind of in the, let's say, early 20th century. If we go one step back, even going into the 19th century, I think the foundations of Vegas were, not too advantageous, being obviously plotted into the Nevada Mojave Desert, which not only is a very dry desert, but it also is a desert that's quite remote from most of the activity that took place in the Great Frontier. So you had this big wave of immigrants, mostly from Europe, but also from China, that were all into the gold rush. The gold rush was a big wave of seeking riches in the 19th century, and most of that activity took place near California, and Vegas was quite distanced from that, like too far away, I would say almost. And even though it had a train station built, there was nothing that could have given any signal that Vegas could be a part of this gold rush, until there was this senator who thought Vegas would be a nice spot on the way to Utah. So he laid there a railroad which went right through Las Vegas, and obviously he found out that in Vegas, even being a dry desert destination, there was water. And water obviously is not only a necessity for human beings, but it's also a necessity for trains, because they have to cool down their engines because they were steam engine trains. So this was really the first lifeline for Las Vegas in the early days. The railroad, and then obviously the fact that Vegas had plenty of water underneath the desert that could replenish the engines of the trains. After the senator had built somewhat of a town surrounding the railroad, Vegas really did not have much future yet. I mean, that came later. And one of the biggest breakthroughs for Vegas really has been the construction of the Hoover Dam, which took place in the 1920s. Because obviously, yes, Vegas was a small town. It had a railroad. There was some gaming activity already, there were the bars and the cafes there. But still, there weren't many tourists. Only you had the people visiting by train. So the major breakthrough was in the 1920s, the 1929 stock market crash, which not only meant that there was huge subsidizing projects such as the Hoover Dam, but also Vegas was one of the first in terms of Nevada, like the state, to legalize gaming, whereas the rest of the country in the US did not do that. So they sort of, I think, found themselves searching for, okay, what should we do? What should we do here in the desert? And obviously offering games of chance was the first milestone and the first way to attract tourists.
Very interesting. And if you were to Vegas have undergone metamorphosis and a continuous metamorphosis. It's a city that is alive and changing, and it's vibrant throughout the years, of course. Is there a way to kind of divide the time in different eras in Vegas, would you say? Are there different particular eras that you would point out to Vegas if you think about the timeline?
Yeah, so in the book I have divided the book in 5 parts. So the first part we obviously just described, being a very lonely, deserted part where Vegas was really searching for its destination in life, its lifelines, and obviously the railroad and the Hoover Dam providing enough tourism, and then the legalization of gaming. I think that's sort of phase 1. So there they had laid the foundation for future success. But obviously that's not enough. You need much more than just tourists and games of chance. So I think the second phase kind of starts in the 1940s and 50s, where Vegas was becoming this interesting town for what we call nowadays the Mafia. Back in those days, they wouldn't call themselves that, but they were kind of organized groups from Chicago, from New York, who had trouble, making their living and finding their ways in those areas, because obviously, once the legal situation changed, they needed new places to go and find their places. And Vegas was a major attraction for them because it offered so many chances for them. There was no police, there was no legal framework under which they would be scrutinized. So they could really find legitimation, and also they were welcome. The first entrepreneurs in Las Vegas who started the first casinos in the 1920s and 30s, they didn't have much money. They were always searching for financing, and financing is what the Mafia could bring. So the Mafia obviously brought in a few frontmen from Chicago, from New York, but also from Los Angeles. And those guys really helped the first entrepreneurs in Vegas finish their casinos, because obviously they started building a resort or a motel, but they couldn't finish it most of the time because of money problems. And then the mob just came to the rescue. So I would say that is definitely the second phase of sort of the evolution of Vegas, the mob coming to the rescue. The mob obviously, found out that casino is all good and people would come and play, but there was something else that they needed, and that was the attraction of entertainers. And I think you could almost see that as a phase 3, because the first entertainers, the big names, sort of came in the 50s. Obviously you had Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack moving in. So those headliners really provided Vegas a new lifeline, because when you would come to Vegas in the 50s, after the Second World War, you not only could play in a casino, but you could also see those famous stars. And I think that Vegas really found out that was a major key to its success. Attracting top headliners, combining that with, obviously the casino. That is sort of the phase 3 in Vegas evolution. And they built it in the 50s, but they really laid out most of that success in the 60s as well. And there, the phase 3 kind of ends with Jay Sarno obviously coming into Vegas in the 1960s, building Caesar's Palace, which I think you could call the first mega resort. That is the third phase. And I would say, obviously, the 60s with Jay Sarno, it was a glorious era, but it was also a difficult one, where the 60s and the 70s were kind of, recession times. Howard Hughes, obviously a big billionaire, came into Vegas, rescued most of the smaller casinos. He bought them. And these days were full of, cycles of up and down, and Vegas struggling still. So that third phase was not an easy one. And then early 80s, Vegas changes again with, I think, what I would say is the era of Steve Wynn. Steve Wynn was a guy who visited Vegas already in the 60s with his then wife, Elaine Wynn. They were visiting one of the shows at the Sands, visiting Frank Sinatra, and Steve fell in love with Vegas. He came from Miami. He was, like Jay Sarno, actually a kind of a new guy in town. And he started off really slow with, a first stake in a hotel, and then he went to downtown in the 70s. He built his stake in the Golden Nugget. He did a very good job turning around the Golden Nugget and built it also like in Atlantic City. Made a lot of money in Atlantic City, and then came backwards to the Strip, where he saw the opportunity that, Caesar's Palace was still doing well. But obviously he saw a major opportunity because I think he mentioned in my interview with him that once he got to the Strip, all the motels were still in the same kind of condition where they had been in the 60s and the 70s. So there wasn't really a major change in this phase of Vegas. So he thought, okay, if I add something new, if I add something spectacular, and if I can finance it in much bigger terms than the mob ever could have done, then I can probably take ownership of the Strip. And so he did. So in the 80s, he partnered up with Mike Milken. And Milken obviously being a big name in the private equity sector. I think he's one of the major, founders of the financial system in the US. And Milken thought if he could lend Steve Wynn enough money to build a mega resort, he would do it. And that's how the Mirage happened in 1989. And that is sort of the phase 4, I would say, the early, the breakthrough, I would say, for Las Vegas, because the Mirage was the first mega resort in Las Vegas, and it changed everything. It changed not only the numbers, it changed the way that the industry perceived a casino hotel, because obviously you can imagine that everybody was scrutinizing these hotels, and Vegas was still sort of perceived as a mob town, a mafia kind of place. And Steve Wynn changed that. He showed to the world that building casino resorts is actually a legitimate corporate way of doing business. And, Steve Wynn wasn't the only one. Kirk Kerkorian is another big name in there. So they kind of competed along the way. Kirk Kerkorian, obviously, with his MGM empire, made, I think, a big contribution to Vegas as well. And then this mega resort era in the 90s unfolded. And, in my book, Phase 5 really starts with the Wynn being built in 2005. And that I see as the pinnacle of Vegas, because if you go to Vegas nowadays, there's multiple mega resorts. Obviously, there's 36 hotels. But I think the Wynn is the absolute pearl, I would say, in terms of luxury, offering, entertainment, but also the way that they integrate everything. So back to your first question, like how did you start the book? Well, my first visit to Wynn Las Vegas for me really changed things of how I perceived Vegas as well. Sorry,
exciting, Joris.
Bit of a long answer there, but
perfect. We love it. And of course, Vegas is a city of legends, right? Anyone who goes to Vegas will come away from there with a story. There's the famous saying, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," and we all have stories from this city one way or the other. But if we then expand the timeline over decades, there are of course many pivotal and really big moments of this city, and some really interesting and great stories that come out of all the change that the city has seen. So I wanted to ask you, Joris, is there any particular big Vegas story, big Vegas legend that you particularly find interesting when you made your research for the book?
If I go into what has been my most fun exercition in terms of writing, it definitely was Jay Sarno for me. So Jay Sarno, I think he was the symbol of what Las Vegas was and still is, a place of fun, a place where people go to for, seeing things that you don't see at home. That is, I think, for me, the essence, what Vegas is. And people compare it to Walt Disney, right? Like Walt Disney World is the imagination, the world of imagination for children. Vegas always has been the world of imagination and crazy times for adults. And I think Jay Sarno, just like Steve Wynn, but then like in the earlier phase, in the 60s, he came to Vegas also from Miami. But he was this, I don't know, he was a hedonistic type of guy. Everything he did in multitude. So when he first built Caesar's Palace, he went way overspending. He threw like this opulent launch party with hundreds of thousands of glasses of champagne and tens of thousands of lobsters and I don't know, he flew in eggs and caviar from Moscow, and like in those days you can imagine that people had never seen that before. So he revolutionized Vegas. But the character behind Jay Sarno was for me the most legendary thing to write about, because Jay Sarno was a man who had a family. He had 5 children and he had a lovely wife, but obviously building a casino resort changed him. He got a bit too much involved in the entertainment scene himself. You know, there are stories about him where he walks into his own Caesar's Palace, and obviously the idea of Caesar's Palace was that everybody would have to feel like an emperor inside that place. So everybody had to divulge in food and women and, you know, everything that the Romans did in size. And so Jay Sarno obviously himself became this kind of oversized personality, meaning that he could not be loyal anymore to his wife. You know, he was giving money to prostitutes everywhere. He was getting them into his room, you know, and obviously his wife at some point found out, and she actually let him do that for many, many years, as long as he just would come home and have his steak dinner, which I think she made the best. Even all his restaurants couldn't make a steak dinner like his wife. But then at some point, it just all was coming, you know, it went too much, and his wife divorced him. This was actually when he lost Caesar's Palace. He lost it a few years after he had it. He built Circus afterwards, which was also a crazy casino. But sort of the last 5 to 10 years of his life, you know, he felt kind of lonely because his wife had left him. She had divorced him, but he also threw all his money away at the tables. So can you imagine this guy becoming a multi-millionaire, a successful casino magnate who just spent his last years in, well, I would see it as misery, because, you know, obviously he had all the women he wanted, but also all the money he wanted, but he threw just everything away. And when he died, which is kind of a funny story as well, he left zero to his children. And the way that he died, by the way, is also a crazy Vegas story. He was in a hot tub. He found himself in a hot tub with a young woman. He had a big cigar in his mouth, and he got a heart attack. So that was how he left Earth. So obviously that chapter for me was like, you know, that crazy wow thing, like the real Vegas experience. He lived it over the top.
Yeah, Vegas is certainly a place that can either make you or break you, or in certain cases make you and break you, right? Yeah. I mean, Elvis is another great example of this, right? Of a figure who made it and broke it, right?
It just went through my mind. Yeah, Elvis is the same thing. I don't know if people have seen that wonderful movie of Baz Luhrmann, which has come out like in a few years before, where Tom Hanks plays the Colonel and Elvis is played by forget his name, Austin Butler, I think. Epic movie of how Elvis's decline was sort of fueled by his Vegas experience. You know, I think, you know, Vegas is not a place where you want to live, especially not on a strip. You want to visit Vegas, you want to have fun for a few days, but then you want to go out of the city because it's too much. You know, it's not sustainable, not for the money, but also not for your life. It's not good.
No, not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And also, you know, an observation that you make when you go to Vegas, perhaps for the first time, is that the city is somewhat divided in two, as you point out here in the beginning of the recording, with the old Vegas at Fremont Street in downtown Vegas. And then you have the strip, of course, with the newer, bigger, grander resorts, let's say. What was the move? What was the reason for the move from, let's say, the development in Fremont to then the development of the strip? Why was the strip born, let's say, from the origins in Fremont?
Good question. So first of all, there was this famous mobster named Bugsy Siegel, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. He's been covered a lot, and he was the frontman for the Chicago outfit. And when Bugsy Siegel went to Vegas, they didn't want him downtown. They said, like, Mr. Siegel, go somewhere else. Like, we don't want you here. You're a criminal. You know, he had a bad reputation. So Bugsy then thought, okay, I'm going to buy a hotel on Highway 41, which then was not very well developed yet, which later became the Strip. And he bought the Flamingo, which then was a small place built by a guy named Billy Wilkerson. And Siegel put a gun to the founder's head, to Billy Wilkerson, and said, like, you know, leave this town. I will take over the hotel. Here's some money. Go away. And that's what happened. And then Siegel kind of built the first major nice luxury hotel, which is the Flamingo. Siegel obviously didn't live long because he overspent quite a lot on the Flamingo. But that's sort of the first shift, I think, from downtown to the Strip. So the Strip got its first luxury hotel. Later, I think what helped fuel the Strip more than downtown is obviously the space. So downtown was more of a tight space where most of the plots were already sold. And even though it was like a bustling street, Fremont Street, I think, you know, the opportunity that you had on the Strip with all that land, I think that's what the major entrepreneurs saw as, like, wow, this is something else. Like, I could get a 10 times bigger plot on the Strip and build, you know, a bigger resort, opposed to like having a small casino place in Fremont Street. So the Sands, for example, in the 50s, which came after the Flamingo, was this other place that just thought, okay, I'm just going to build on the Strip, and I'm going to try and do a better way of building a casino resort than Fremont Street has ever done. And that's what they did. And Caesar's Palace, same thing in the 60s. When Steve Wynn came in the early 70s, he started the Golden Nugget, right? He took his share in the Golden Nugget, which was the place in downtown. And Steve made a lot of success on downtown, but also he saw that the major opportunity was on the Strip. So I think, kind of answering your question, is the amount of space is the biggest reason that I think visionaries saw in the Strip, and made them, you know, made it really evolve into the highway, opposed to Fremont Street, which kind of left its importance in the 70s.
Right. I want to talk about the Mirage for a moment. And for those of us who have been to Vegas in the last, 5, 10, 15 years, we've seen Mirage as kind of like a more and more dated and older hotel and so on. That recently, of course, closed shop. It's going to be torn down and built up as a new resort soon. But at the opening of the Mirage in, I believe, 1989, something along those lines, the Mirage was really the epitome of luxury, right? It was a massive step up for Vegas at that time that paved way for Vegas to evolve into these bigger and bigger mega resorts. Can you talk about this, the importance of the Mirage? What was the story behind it? And what was the kind of interesting stories around the Mirage in general, and how important was it for the city at that time?
Yeah, so part of the answer I already gave with Mike Milken, obviously, right? So Mike Milken being the finance whiz kid for Steve Wynn, providing him with junk bonds. And junk bonds was a new form of financing a hotel. It had never been done before. So the older hotels before the Mirage were always financed by either the Mafia or small banks. You know, the Las Vegas, Nevada Bank, for example, by Perry Thomas, was a bank that could finance a hotel up to, I would say, 50 million, 40, 50 million. Then you had Caesar's Palace, which cost about 20 million, which was financed by a pension fund, actually, a state pension fund, which also kind of was run by the mob. So, the mob, they could never finance anything bigger than 50 million, I would say. So Steve Wynn's vision was, okay, when we want to build a mega resort like the Mirage, his plan for that, he needed hundreds of millions. I mean, the Mirage, I think, was built for more than 600 million. So it's just a 10x on a construction cost. So obviously him being able to hook up with Mike Milken provided him with a big opportunity. But I think it's something else as well. Steve brought a new vision. He brought a vision that a casino resort should not only be a casino and a hotel and a headliner. I mean, that kind of helped Vegas in the 60s and 70s, but in the 80s, when Vegas was kind of this sleepy town, I think Steve thought like he needed something else, something bigger. And what Steve's vision is that the casino is only, as good as your next door casino. So he needed something else to attract people. And what he thought was really helping a casino succeed was the non-casino stuff, being, for example, fantastic restaurants, fantastic shows, and also a big landmark. So having the land and the opportunity of money, he built this crazy volcano outside the Mirage. He built a waterfall. He built a dolphin reserve. He built a gigantic entertainment lounge where he, had a Siegfried and Roy sign. So he pulled together like this mixture of entertainment that nobody had ever seen before on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. So the Mirage really changed everything when it came to size and offering. I think one of the greatest features where the Mirage really superseded every casino along the way is that it attracted people outside walking down the strip with the volcano. And then inside it was a big change as well. Like there was this giant atrium with light coming into the casino. It was just a spectacular place that nobody had ever seen before. So scale is one thing, but also the vision to put everything together in one place. You never had to leave the resort anymore. You didn't have to go anywhere else. I think the Mirage was the first hotel, even in the world, which would be enough for you to visit Vegas. You didn't have to go to a neighbor casino anymore. Everything was there. The kids were happy. Your wife was happy. You, as a father, as a gambler, you were happy. The whole family was happy. Because everybody was entertained. And that is, I think, what Steve really brought to Vegas, an integrated resort.
Yeah, brilliant. And throughout the years, of course, many resorts have come and gone, the Mirage being the latest example of that, of course. There are some resorts that are longer lasting than others. And I always like to point out Bellagio as one of those kind of like timeless complexes that is standing the test of time, let's say. In your opinion, if you think about the resorts that are longer lasting than others, do you see any particular trend of what makes resorts last longer than perhaps others? I'd like to also just kind of point out, like in the 90s as well, you had a lot of the themed resorts that came, the Circus, Excalibur, and so on and so forth. Themed resorts, I don't know, they go in trends kind of a thing where other resorts are more timeless. Can you talk about just the resorts that seems to be standing the test of time from a Vegas perspective?
Yeah, no, good point. So the Mirage, in some ways, being an evolution from Caesar's Palace, was sort of the second themed resort. The Mirage obviously being based on Hawaii, and sort of Bali as well. The 90s indeed were an era of themed resorts. You had the Excalibur based on a medieval castle from Germany. The Paris came in 99. You had the Venetian, of course, in the early 2000s. There's all these crazy resorts coming up in the 90s, and they did sort of last until now. But I think, in the long way, what will make resorts stand the test of time is originality. And it's also quality. It's a mixture of those two. For example, all those resorts that we just spoke about, Caesar's Palace, the Paris, the Excalibur, the Venetian, they used to be founder-led resorts, right? You had certain conglomerates operating those resorts, but they were really focused with those resorts. They were operating them from a founder perspective. You know, Kirk Kerkorian was doing the MGM. He was doing later he acquired like most of the other hotels, by the way. But you had the Excalibur, which was led by Bill Bennett. Steve Wynn had the Mirage and Treasure Island, and then later Bellagio. Founder-led resorts, and I think those resorts in the era of the 90s and the 2000s made Vegas successful because there was a CEO who was also a founder. Nowadays, even though those resorts are still alive, they're operated by big conglomerates, Wall Street-led companies such as MGM, such as Caesars Entertainment. And yes, they're maintained. Yes, they're still alive. You know, when you go to Bellagio nowadays or the MGM or the Excalibur, they're still there. But sort of the soul is not there anymore. And I think it's a sad evolution in which I would also, it's part of the fifth phase in Vegas. It's not all about Wynn Las Vegas. It's also about the loss of many of those resorts not being owned by a founder anymore. It's now just corporate, and it's still, you know, because they were founded so well. You know, the Paris was built for less money than the Bellagio, but what a great resort that is. If you look at the architecture of the Paris, and
beautiful.
You know, it's wonderful. But if you look inside now, there's no difference anymore between the Paris or the Bellagio. It's all the same thing. You know, it's Caesars and MGM making the resorts kind of, they're all, in some way they're exploiting these teams, and they're not adding anymore to the experience of the customer. It's a numbers game, you know. As a customer in the 90s, you know, there was a Major D. He would know your name. He would say, "Hey, Pierre, welcome to the show. I'll escort you to your room or to your seat in a show." And nowadays, you're just a rewards number, and you're in a computer database. And you know, it's a different world where major corporations are leading the way, and it's not all bad. I mean, obviously, the major corporations are also doing a good job in paving the way for the next era of Vegas, which is, you know, this sort of gigantic major capital with sports events and with big events like the Super Bowl or the Formula One, or like Vegas nowadays is becoming much more of an event-driven city, it seems. The resorts are there, but they're not like the only thing out there anymore. There's so much more to experience in Vegas nowadays. So I guess everybody has to kind of adapt to a new Las Vegas. The Las Vegas of the themed resorts with founder-led hotels is sort of gone. It's now corporations and events, and it's a hard change. It's a tough change for people, because if you've experienced the 90s and the 2000s or even the 80s, you know, you don't really, I don't think you find Vegas attractive anymore, or you don't feel the same vibe anymore. It's all new now. It's massive. It's changed, and if it's for the better or the worse, I don't know yet. Like time will tell.
Another of those founders that left this earth recently was Sheldon Adelson, right, who built the Sands Empire and Venetian and Palazzo. Sands eventually became the biggest gambling company in the world, and Sheldon at the top was this larger-than-life type of character that was loved by his staff, but also a very controversial figure from our point of view in the iGaming industry, lobbying against our industry and so on and so forth in the 2000s. Can you talk about Sheldon Adelson, perhaps, as a persona? What was his story, and how did he build Sands?
Yeah, Sheldon Adelson is a guy that came from a very different kind of background. He owned a major IT conference company, and in the 80s and the 90s he made a lot of money with that company. And when he sold it, I think he was already a big Vegas fan, obviously. So he saw an opportunity with the Sands being not in a good position anymore. He saw an opportunity as a businessman to acquire the Sands, implode it, as you always used to do with Vegas hotels, and add another themed resorts, as you just mentioned, the Venetian on its place. But Adelson, you know, he's kind of a strange kind of guy, in that I would not place him under the same umbrella as Steve Wynn. I would kind of place him under the same roof as Kirk Kerkorian. Kerkorian and Adelson both are guys that like size, you know. They love mega resorts, like the bigger the better. Like Kerkorian, when he built his second MGM resort, he created 6,000 rooms. Adelson thought, okay, I can do more. So he built with the Venetian and later the Palazzo, which he combined, 7,000 rooms. So still, it's the largest resort on planet Earth. There's no hotel on Earth with more hotel rooms than the Venetian Palazzo. So Sheldon liked size, and he was a convention guy. So he saw in Vegas an opportunity, a destination for conventioneers. And he kind of was inspired by Kerkorian, who was the first one who brought in the convention tourists in the 70s and 80s. So Adelson, when he built the Venetian, he was the first guy that really made every hotel room in his Venetian Palazzo hotel, he made it into a suite. So once you go into the Venetian, you will not see a regular hotel room. You will be in a suite. Doesn't matter which room you check into, it's always huge. And obviously business tourists, as he knew very well, they like those kind of oversized rooms. You know, they have like a lot of luggage, you know, they're corporate guys, you know, they like the size. So I think what Adelson brought to Vegas is not only convention business, and he's the visionary behind it, but also he brought size. And the reason that Adelson, for me, is not in the same league as Steve Wynn, who is obviously the main character in my book, is because I think he was less of a Vegas guy. Adelson always had much more in mind than just Las Vegas. You know, Vegas was one thing for him. Adelson was the first entrepreneur that really dived into the Chinese market. You know, he created basically the Macau region. He saw that opportunity, and others followed suit. You know, Steve Wynn wasn't the first one going into Macau. It was Sheldon Adelson. So Adelson is much more of a global, a cosmopolitan gaming giant. That's how he should be envisioned. I think that's how he should be regarded. And I think he needs to be applauded for having that vision. You know, creating a huge corporation. Obviously, the Sands being one of the biggest gaming firms. And I liked what you actually mentioned about him not liking the online scene. Steve Wynn also didn't like that. So I think they saw in online as sort of a competing force that they thought like, oh, that's going to destroy potentially the offline scene.
Yeah, brilliant. Of course, it was Sheldon Adelson who was largely responsible for the Black Friday event that happened in the early 2010s, where much of the American online gambling and online poker, specifically, sites were shut down. Heavy lobbying, and Sheldon was the biggest donor of the Republican Party as well, right? Biggest donor of Trump, and he was heavily involved in lobbying. That's what Sheldon Adelson and Steve Wynn had in common. They both were Republican donors, but also they were both opposing to the online gaming bill, online gaming scene. But actually, that sort of is the two only, I would say, similarities between these two characters, because they hated each other. They didn't like. They hated each other. Yes. Yeah, they didn't like each other. I mean, the Venetian was obviously positioned next to the Wynn, and they had like all these lawsuits all over the place, parking garages, licensing, and I don't know. Like on stage, they would say, "Oh, we're big friends," you know. "Oh, Sheldon is one of my biggest friends," but I don't think Steve Wynn and Sheldon Adelson liked each other. It was kind of like they could see each other from the top of their respective towers exactly. There as enemies. Yeah. So nowadays Vegas have kind of evolved into almost a duopoly, right? In the Strip, where it's not that these resorts are individually owned by various entities, but they are controlled by just a few entities that are controlling most of the Strip, right? Can you talk about like how did that evolution happen from a lot of founders who started individual casinos into this kind of like duopoly? I believe it's between MGM and Caesars kind of thing that are controlling much of the properties over there. Yeah, you're almost right. It's even more complicated than that. It's obviously we're talking about the phases of evolution, and the fourth phase being that themed resorts
founder-led casino resorts era. Once the 2000s started happening, and even more so the 2010s, so let's say the 2010 to now era, not only did MGM and Caesars acquire many of the resorts, which meant that they were 36 hotels on the Strip, but mostly operated now by those big conglomerates, so that you got right. But there's also been another development where MGM, Caesars, Harrah's, all those operating firms, they kind of let go of the retail, the real estate. So the real estate under the casinos, the land, no longer belongs to MGM or Caesars Palace anymore. It's now private equity firms owning most of the land underneath those resorts. So I call it the split age. The split age being that the land is owned by private equity and the resorts are owned, sort of operated by MGM, Caesars, Wynn, Sands. So it's kind of a divide and conquer kind of road where Vegas is headed. And it's crazy, it really goes into my story, into my point that none of these hotels are owned anymore by, a founder, a person. It's all about like conglomerates that are sort of, distancing themselves away from Vegas, but they do own a lot of the important assets. And I don't know where it's heading with Vegas in this regard. Like, I don't know if it's a positive development, because maybe I'm too much of a romantic, but I like the idea that there is one founder and he owns the land and he owns the casino and he's making his rounds and he's, shaking hands with the customers. And he's, I think that Vegas misses that kind of operation right now. I think it's making Vegas move away more and more from the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember just a couple of years ago walking around the floors of the Palazzo and asking staff about their thoughts around Sheldon Adelson, and they speak about him as it's his family, their family, right? It's that's how it was, that they're intimately involved in the property and the founder, and they look after them and so on. And that's perhaps what missing is. Final question for you here today, Joris, is can you talk a little bit more about the book itself? Then perhaps where can people find it? What is the specialty? There's a limited amount of copies that you have printed. It's a perfect gift, perhaps. Can you talk a little bit more as a final part?
I have it here.
Wow,
so
beautiful.
I can talk about it for hours, but it's better to show, right? So, I mean, this is I wouldn't call it a book. It is a statement in your living room or in your office. So that's why I always used to call it, like the last 3 months, the ultimate iGaming gift. It's a handmade case, a box, or as you could say, in leather. So it's vegan leather, fake leather, and gold foil text on it. And then if you open up the box, the book is in there, really comfortable on a velvet bed, actually. So it's kind of a crazy presentation for a book. But I thought, like, Vegas being this over-the-top place, why not create an over-the-top book? And if you buy something like that, you wanna show it off to your visitors, to your clients, to whomever is visiting your office or your living room. So the book, it weighs 18 pounds with the box, so it's a lot of it's a massive carry. Don't carry it on a plane. It is 450 pages in total. I would say 80% is photos and 20% is text. As we talked about during this wonderful podcast, it's chronological, so it goes from A to Z in time. And there's been some really great Vegas executives, former Vegas executives, that have helped me put together the story. One of them is Roger Thomas, who was the right hand of Steve Wynn for 40 years. He was involved in the design and the interior design of the Bellagio, the Mirage, Wynn Las Vegas. So this guy, even more than Todd Haushalter, has really lived through all the eras of Vegas, and was right at the decision-making process of these hotels. So Roger obviously has the greatest stories when you interview him about Steve Wynn, but also about his own experiences along the way. And the other guy that edited the book, more of the textual part, is Glenn Schaefer. And Glenn is the ex-CFO of Circus Enterprises, which not only built Circus, but also the Excalibur, Mandalay Bay, so many of the resorts that are more on the south part of the strip. So it's not only my work, actually, it's really a team effort. Yeah, I mean, it's $4.95 a copy, $4.95/euro. So it's not easy. It's not a thing that you just buy right away. So you have to think about it, obviously. But I think for people in gaming, it's also not something that they cannot afford. So yeah, I mean, that's it basically.
And where can you find it?
It's on the site thelasvegasbook.org. So it's a proprietary website where we showcase the book, and it's also in Vegas in some of the shops. It's in the Win at Home store, it's in the Bellagio and the Aria gift shops. So, but I think, most of the iGaming people will just be better off ordering it online.
Absolutely. So thelasvegasbook.org is the website, of course. Joris, thank you so much for giving us this fantastic history lesson of the most dynamic city on planet Earth. Looking forward to read it myself, the book. And congratulations just for all the hard years of work compiled into this wonderful project. Thank you so much, Joris.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.